This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him. I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? About 40 years ago, a young college graduate, Mike Wirth, joined Chevron, then and now one of the largest energy companies in the world. Today, Mike Wirth is the CEO of Chevron and dealing with the multiple issues that energy companies have to deal with today, including renewable energy. I sat down with Mike Wirth to talk about what it's like to run Chevron today in the current environment. So tell me about the state of the oil world right now. It seems as if the large oil companies or carbon energy companies are doing quite well. They have record profits, record revenues. And as a result of that, some people in the White House and other places have suggested a windfall profits tax. So is the industry in such great shape that it can afford a windfall profits tax?
Well, it's a cyclical industry, David. We see prices go up, we see prices go down. A windfall profits tax is not going to encourage more supply. It's not likely to reduce prices. In fact, it could do quite the opposite. President Carter tried a windfall profits tax in 1980. It was rescinded several years later, had collected a lot less revenue than was expected, and didn't result in more investment. It resulted in less investment and less production. So normally, if you want less of something, you tend to put more taxes on it. You want less smoking, you tax cigarettes. If we want more energy production, we want more supply to bring prices down, putting taxes on energy production is probably not a good idea.
In your current job, do you have to go to Washington to talk to regulators and legislators, and do you find that an uplifting experience to do that?
I do have to go to Washington. Uplifting is probably not the first word that comes to mind. I mean, they're detailed discussions, and we need to help regulators understand the potential consequences of some of the things they consider.
So would you say that Washington, by and large, doesn't really understand the economics of the energy industry, or they could learn a little bit more than they know now?
Well, I have empathy for people that sit in these roles. They have often broad responsibilities, and they may not have personal expertise and depth in some of the areas they're responsible for. So I view my job as to come in and try to provide objective input and help them understand the consequences of things they're considering to avoid unintended consequences and help achieve the goals that they're looking to achieve.
So when the President of the United States says energy companies are gouging American people, you get to be used to this when you're an energy executive, more or less, I assume. You don't like it, but you probably are accepting of it by now.
I disagree with that characterization. I don't think it's accurate. This is we're an industry of price takers, not
right.
price makers. These are global commodity markets, and prices go up, prices come down. We allocate billions of dollars of capital, our company does, every year. Just 2 years ago, we were losing billions of dollars as prices plummeted. And so through the cycle, it's an industry that generates kind of 10%-ish returns on capital employed, which is, I think, by the standards of many other industries, a pretty modest return.
So the war in Ukraine has driven oil prices up, I think it's fair to say. Do you think that that is a principal reason why the major energy companies are doing quite well, because the supply has been reduced because of the war in Ukraine? And do you think that when that war does end, eventually it will, I assume, it'll have an impact on reducing energy prices in carbon areas?
Well, the war and the associated actions have definitely had an impact on energy markets. But if you step back and look at the broader context, in 2020, we saw demand collapse with the pandemic when the world really locked down. In fact, companies in our industry had to shut in wells and stop producing because there was no place to store the oil that wasn't needed by the market. So investment levels came down, and then and nobody knew how long this would last. As the economy recovered post the pandemic, we got vaccines, demand returned. the industry's been struggling to keep up with the rate of growth once again. And so the market was already in a pretty tight situation before this war began. I do think when eventually it's resolved, and all conflicts eventually are resolved, I think that uncertainty and the risk to supply from one of the world's largest suppliers will be reduced, and I think we'll see markets reflect that.
A number of years ago, oil prices went as low as, I think, $20 a barrel. And when it was that low, major oil companies, like I think Chevron and others, said we can't afford to drill anymore in either, let's say, Alaska, the North Sea, other places, because we need to have oil at $70 a barrel to make drilling affordable and profitable. Has that come back now that oil prices are up? Are people now drilling in major projects around the world to kind of get oil that's going to take 4 or 5 or 10 years to build and drill, or is that not happening again?
We're seeing some of that happen again, certainly. What has really changed in the last decade, David, is what we see in the U.S. in the Permian Basin, but also in some other parts of this country and in other countries now, is the ability to produce oil and gas from rock that is very, very dense, very hard, and historically has not been very productive. But with directional drilling and the ability to fracture these formations now, we're seeing the ability to produce from areas that we couldn't before, and at prices that are lower than some of these very complex, difficult projects. And so the need for the ultra deep water, the Arctic, has been reduced as we see these other resources come in at a lower cost.
So how many employees does Chevron have?
About 36,000 in about 100 different countries.
And how much oil do you produce a day?
A little bit over 3 million barrels of oil equivalent per day. So mostly oil, some gas, and we convert the units on the gas to give you the energy equivalent. So about 3 million barrels a day.
So the United States produces 10 million barrels a day or something like that?
Closer to 12.
12, okay. So you're producing about 25% of the oil produced in the United States, more or less?
As a company, you could say that our U.S. production is about 1.2 million barrels a day, so we're less than 10% of U.S. production.
So right now, the United States is more or less energy sufficient compared to, let's say, the 1960s or 70s when we imported a lot of oil. I think we probably consume 10 to 12 million barrels a day.
Closer to 20.
We consume 20 million barrels a day, and we produce roughly, you're saying 12? So we're importing the equivalent of about 8 million barrels a day, which is better than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Where are we mostly importing that from? Is it from OPEC countries?
Canada, our neighbors, are the largest suppliers of oil. I mean, you remember all the controversy around the Keystone Pipeline. We're a big customer of Canada, who's a large resource country right next door.
How do you get that oil down here?
There are other pipelines that have been built in years gone by. Sometimes it flows by rail, and some of it comes by ship. You can bring it down through pipelines into ports along the West Coast, for instance, or into the Atlantic Basin and bring it by ship. So Canada's the largest supplier, and then other people in the region. And we still bring some oil to this country from the Middle East, but much less than we did back in the 70s.
Now, do you think there's much oil to be found in the lower 48 at this point, or even in, let's say, Alaska as well? Or mostly we know where all the oil is, and there's no more big Permian Basin kind of deposits anywhere?
People have said that over time, and then we've always been surprised. And so the U.S. has been explored more than any other place in the world. I think the industry has a good idea, but technology allows you sometimes to recover things that you haven't been able to before. That's the story of shale. The other one that continues to be a positive story is deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we'll go out and drill in a mile or more of water depth and then go down several more miles, 6, 7, 8 miles into the earth, and find large fields. And the Gulf of Mexico is still relatively underexplored compared to the onshore. So I think there's still room for more discoveries.
So when you're starting there 40 years ago, did you say, I might be the CEO someday, or did you not think that was realistic?
No, I just hoped I would last to the next 2 weeks to get my next paycheck. That was never the game plan.
Let's talk about Chevron itself. What is the roots of Chevron? When was Chevron created? When did it start?
Founded in 1879 in Southern California. Began as a company called Pacific Coast oil company. Made the first commercial discovery in California in Pico Canyon in Southern California. Became part of the Rockefeller Standard Oil Trust in the latter part of the 1800s, and then became Standard Oil of California when the Standard Oil Trust was broken up. Our headquarters and home has always been in California. We've been around for 143 years and really a part of the world's history. We made the first discovery in the Middle East, first discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia, among other milestones, and a long history of the world really reflected in our company.
So if I go to a gasoline station and want to get gasoline for my car, is there really a difference between the oil that Chevron might be produced that makes in the gasoline and one of your competitors? That gasoline is pretty much all the same?
There are specifications, minimum standards that have to be met for the products. And then what you find is that different companies either exceed those by more or less than others. And also, we have special additives. So we have a wholly owned additive company that manufactures an additive called Chevron that has a very special chemistry to keep engine parts clean. And as engines get more sophisticated, as the tolerances get thinner, you can have carbon deposits that can affect performance in your cylinders, your injectors. Chevron cleans that up better than others.
So if you're driving along and you need gas, will you stop at an Exxon station, or you got to keep going till you can see a Chevron station?
Keep going till I see a Chevron station.
Hey, let's talk about your own background. So how does one become the CEO of Chevron? Tell us, where were you born?
I was born in Los Alamos, New Mexico. My dad worked at the National Lab, and I grew up in Colorado, Golden, Colorado.
And you went to college where?
University of Colorado in Boulder, studied chemical engineering.
And you said, I want to work in the energy world?
At the time, chemical engineers could work in a number of different industries. I had a summer internship where I worked in a refinery in the Denver area. Found the work interesting. I found the people interesting, and had an offer to come to the West Coast and work for Standard of California. And it looked like a fun place to live and a place where I could do interesting work.
So basically, this is your only employer since you graduated from college, more or less?
For 40 years, the only employer.
So when you're starting there 40 years ago, did you say, I might be the CEO someday, or did you not think that was realistic?
No, I just hoped I would last to the next 2 weeks to get my next paycheck. That was never the game plan.
So what did you do? Did you move around the world over the course of your 40 years at Chevron? What did you do to kind of rise up? Were you an operations person, or an exploration person, an administrative person?
Started out as a design engineer and worked on big projects. So an oil shale project, not the type that we develop today, but the other kind of oil shale you used to hear about. Built a plant that you can't find any trace of today. Worked on a facility in California to help bring in oil from offshore. Sold for pennies on the dollar eventually. A project in Africa that never happened because of a civil war. So I began by specializing in spectacularly unsuccessful projects. And at some point I said, this doesn't look like a great career path. And so I moved into our marketing business, where I built gas stations and replaced underground tanks that were made of steel with ones that were made of fiberglass so they wouldn't leak. And you and I remember the old clickety-clackety wheels that would spin around on a gasoline pump. I used to put in the first electronic pumps back in the day. So these were smaller projects, but I could see the beginning, the end. I started to understand the commerce and how the business worked. And from there, a variety of roles, primarily operating roles across different businesses and around the world.
When did you become the CEO?
5 years ago, in 2018.
Now, some people might say that God looks favorably upon the CEOs of energy companies because he lets them live a long time. And a number of your predecessors have lived quite a while, and some of them you live in your same area that you live in now. Do they call you with advice all the time?
Actually, I'm really fortunate, David. The three people who have done my job immediately preceding me, each for roughly a decade, the 1990s, the 2000s, and the 20-teens, live within a few miles of where I live. I see them regularly. We have lunch together, and
that's a plus. In other words, don't they tell you you're doing this wrong or doing that wrong? That doesn't come up.
Well, I get a lot of good advice, and you asked earlier about advice. These are people who have actually done my job, so I'm interested in their advice. They've lived through wars, the fall of the Soviet Union, terrorist attacks, financial crises. They've seen oil markets go through gyrations. They've dealt with geopolitical surprises. And so their advice is really valuable. During COVID, the first thing I did was call each one of them and say, what lessons did you learn during the crises you faced? How do you think I should handle things as we have this pandemic unfolding? So we have a great relationship, and I see them regularly.
So you're still, by my standards, very young, and you've been the CEO for 5 years. So you could do it for quite a while and still be young, but do you have any ambition to go into the federal government as a cabinet officer or anything like that?
No.
And to do anything other than the energy industry, would you have any other career ambitions, or this is what you want to do?
You know, I love what I do. I love the company I work for and the people that I work with, and I don't have any ambition to do anything other than a good job.
So what do you do for relaxation?
Generally, anything that involves family. So I have 4 children. They're very active in outdoor activities. My wife is a good golfer, a good skier. So you'll find me on a golf course, skiing, scuba diving, fly fishing with family when I'm not at work.
And any of your children in the energy world?
No, not even close.
Okay. So are you a good golfer? There's a view that if you have a low handicap, that's not good for being a CEO because it means you're spending too much time on the golf course. But I don't know whether that's fair or not. But are you a scratch handicap golfer?
Far from it. My wife is almost a scratch handicap golfer. I caddy for her in big tournaments. I actually sometimes will take a couple of vacation days and carry her golf bag. So that tells you who the better golfer is in my house.
Large carbon energy companies seem to me have a difficulty. Are they producing large amounts of carbon energy, which people like to consume, or are they supposed to transition to being renewable energy companies? And what are you doing, for example, to transition yourself a bit to be a renewable company?
Well, we're focused on leveraging our strengths to deliver lower carbon energy to a growing world. And what that means is in the near term, we can find ways, and we are finding ways to reduce the greenhouse gas impact of the energy the world uses today. So we're reducing the emissions associated with oil and gas that the world needs today, needs very, very desperately. And at the same time, we're building new inherently lower carbon energy businesses for tomorrow. So things like renewable fuels, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, geothermal are all technologies we're investing in, businesses we're growing that will play a bigger role tomorrow. And we're going to need many solutions. There is no one solution for this.
So in 2022, you bought a renewable energy company for roughly, I think, $3 billion. Mm-hmm. What was that about? Why did you want to do that?
Well, we had a renewable fuels business ourselves. This company, Renewable Energy Group, was one of the leading producers of biodiesel and soon to be renewable diesel in the United States. And they have great capabilities in the feedstock sourcing area. And so in any fuels business, raw materials are a very important part of the overall value chain. Traditional petroleum products, we have deep expertise in the raw materials sourcing for that. In these products, you're talking about raw materials that are like used cooking oil, something called distiller's corn oil, various bean oils from soybean and other agricultural products. These are markets that we don't have a lot of experience in. The quality, logistics, commercial dimensions of those markets are things that Renewable Energy Group is very good at. They have manufacturing facilities and some marketing. We have big market positions and brand positions, particularly in states like California, that encourage this. So the combination of the two makes a more powerful renewable energy business.
And today, in renewable area, which is obviously a growth area, mm-hmm. Do you think that if you were going to make more acquisitions without giving away inside information, you're likely to do more in the renewable area or in the carbon area?
You know, it's an active field of opportunity in both. For us, it's really driven by strategy, asset quality, value. I mean, the typical things you would look at when you do a deal. But as I said, over the last 2 years, we've done a big traditional energy deal. We've done big renewable acquisition. I think in the years ahead, we'll probably do acquisitions in both of those spaces.
When President Nixon took office, shortly thereafter, there was an oil spill in Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. And then under President Obama, there was an oil spill in the Gulf horizon. It was, I think, a British Petroleum. Mm-hmm. Right now, when you're drilling offshore, how safe is it to be able to avoid those kind of environmental damage? Is it much better than it used to be, or greater precautions than there used to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the industry has continually improved operating practices, equipment. Certainly the regulators in the U.S. have very high standards. We work very closely with the regulators on that. And the advent of newer technologies have continually made this safer. And so these are challenging, difficult operations in those kinds of pressures, water depths, and environments. But the industry has a strong track record today. And there have been some notable incidents over time, but every company in this industry works really hard to prevent those.
So today, do you not worry about that kind of offshore drilling problems anymore because the safety is pretty good compared to what it used to be?
Every day I get up and I worry about safety and protecting the environment. Our people work in a demanding business, and it's a highly technical activity. We have very talented people. We've got very strict protocols and standards to keep people safe and keep the environment safe, but you can never take it for granted.
Why do you think it is that people love energy, but they don't love energy companies? In other words, people in the United States and around the world consume enormous amounts of oil and gas, and the people that provide it, like Chevron, don't seem to be so popular. Why is that?
I don't know exactly why it is. We're a big company. The numbers are big. Sometimes big isn't popular. Big energy, big government, big tech, maybe big private equity's an exception to that. But though we're a big company, we represent less than 2% of global oil production. And so in the scheme of things, it's a very competitive market, and we're a relatively small player. And I think what's important to remember is we need to have a balanced approach to energy. And that means we have to focus on affordability, because affordable energy is really essential for economic prosperity, reliable supply for national security, because energy security and national security are linked, and then protecting the environment. And I think as prices get high and it gets less affordable, you find people that are upset. And part of that is because we really haven't necessarily been able to find the right balance among those three.
And to improve the overall image of the energy industry, is there something you think that the CEOs or the companies can do to improve the image so that people, when they walk down the street, say, wow, Chevron has done a great job for America today? How is that possible, or just energy companies just don't have that kind of likely public image that's going to be so good?
Well, I think what would help, David, is to engage in this more balanced conversation about the benefits of energy. We hear a lot of people that have, views on what some of the consequences are of the use of energy. But as you say, they've made advancements in the quality of life, possible that we wouldn't have imagined, 2 centuries ago. And I think as we go forward, it's absolutely likely that we find ways to meet the needs of a growing world and reduce the carbon impact.
Let's suppose tomorrow you decided to retire, become a cabinet officer or something, or do something else. What would you say you have achieved as the CEO of Chevron that you're most proud of?
Well, I would hope that people would say he thought of others first. He strengthened the culture of our company. He kept people safe and made the company a better company when he left than it was when he founded it.